So we're sitting here again. It's end of World War II. As the end of World War II happens, we're going to fall into this Bretton Woods Agreement where the dollar becomes the central currency of the world, and we have the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank start up. Keynes also wanted there to be a giant free trade agreement as part of this. That's actually going to happen, but after he dies, it ends up being a separate negotiation. Keynes is actually not alive to see it, but there's this thing that we're going to talk about called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which became the World Trade Organization. That's also from Keynes. So Keynes really is the driving force between the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. This system works pretty well, except that once the other countries of the world rebuild and they're strong again, a system that allows them to sit on top of the U.S. and use us to their benefits, probably not a really good system. So the U.S. starts getting trade deficits all the time because all of these other countries are strong and they don't really need our help, and they're able to take advantage of us in the system that was designed to help them rebuild, and that's all well and good. But at some point, you have to be Diana Ross, put your hand up and say, stop in the name of love. Our gold supply was going away. Other countries were coming in, taking our gold. We had these trade deficits. So Richard Nixon stops the Bretton Woods system in 1972. And we go from what are called fixed exchange rates to what are called floating exchange rates. And we know these terminology from our last couple videos ago. Just reminding you, floating exchange rates means we're going to let the market set exchange rates. But the system doesn't actually work that way because countries set their exchange rates. So we have what are called managed or dirty float, which means countries adjust their exchange rate. And we don't ever use the word, or don't often use the word fixed anymore. We don't talk about fixed exchange rates. We use this word pegged, that many countries peg their exchange rate to another currency, which means that they fix it. We just don't use that word fixed. So I want to try to make sure we understand how the world works. And I've drawn a beautiful picture here. Let's suppose that we want to buy a printer from China. We can't go to China and spend dollars. We have to go to China and spend the yuan renminbi, which is their money. Imagine in this system of floating exchange rates that there are money Albertsons all over the world, that there are stores that just buy and sell money. And you walk into the store, instead of there being the vegetable aisle and the canned food aisle and the cereal aisle, there's a dollar aisle and a yen aisle and a yuan aisle and a won aisle and a euro aisle. You get the idea? And so if we want to buy this printer, we have to figure out how many yuan it costs. So maybe it costs 600 yuan in China. So we have to go to the Albertsons, go to the money Albertsons, walk in there, and you do this all electronically, right? It's an electronic world. You grab 600 yuan off the shelf, you walk up to the counter, the person at the counter scans your 600 yuan, goes beep, and says, hey, $90. And you pay them $90 in exchange, and you walk out with the 600 yuan. So that money store has fewer yuan than it used to, and it has more dollars. You walked in there with dollars, you took out yuan. Now, since Americans were buying and buying and buying and buying and buying and buying from China, and China's not buying much from us, we're pumping all of these dollars into this Albertsons and taking all their yuan out. Over time, what should happen is that the yuan's getting scarcer and scarcer and scarcer, and its value should go up, and the dollar is getting more and more plentiful, and its value is going down. Just like anything that's in the grocery store, if you can't keep it on the shelf, you raise the price. Can't keep the yuans on the shelf, raise the price. If there's too many dollars and they're all over the place and you need to get rid of them, you have a big sale on dollars and you lower the price of dollars. So as we're buying these printers and we're buying all this stuff from China, we're pumping the dollars into the international market and taking out the yuan, and the dollar is getting plentiful, the yuan's getting scarce. The value of the yuan should rise and the value of the dollar should fall. But that's not what's going to happen because China doesn't want that to happen. They want the value to stay constant. So they're going to fix it. They're going to manipulate their currency, the yuan renminbi, which means like the people's money. They're going to fix the value. Now, how are they going to do that? Well, you walked into the money Albertsons. You gave them $90 and you walked out with 600 yuan. What China's going to do is print up 600 yuan. They're going to go to the money store. They're going to put in 600 yuan and take out the $90. So what they've done in steps 1 and 2 here is keep the number of yuan in the grocery store constant and simply taken out the dollars. So it's as if they had paid for this printer with dollars. Now in China, instead of them holding yuan, they're holding your $90. Instead of them getting 600 yuan for that printer, they quite literally got $90 for that printer. The value of the yuan and the value of the dollar won't change because the grocery store has the same number of yuan, the international money market has the same number of yuan and the same number of dollars that it started with. So the prices aren't going to change. The difference here now is two things. China had to print up money, and printing up money, as we know, can have an effect on your economy. So this isn't freebie for them. As they print up more and more and more money, it's going to affect their economy. We talked about that before. And you can take more econ classes and learn how that affects things. But then they're holding all of these dollars. And where are they going to spend them? Well, they're going to bring them back to the United States and spend them. So they're going to buy condos on the Strip. They're going to buy AMC theaters. They're going to buy U.S. bonds. They're going to essentially loan us the money back. They're either going to buy things in our country or they're going to loan us the money. Everybody understand that? They're going to loan us the money. When you have a trade deficit, you fund it either by going into debt or by selling your assets to the other country. So if we have a $600 billion trade deficit, you can think of that as us going into debt to China by $600 billion. We go into debt to them over and over and over again every year that we have a trade deficit, to them, to Japan, to Korea, to Germany, these countries that we have these perpetual trade deficits with. We're going into debt to them. The United States came out of the 1960s as the biggest creditor nation in the world. People owed us more money than anybody owed any other country on earth. Now we are the biggest debtor nation. We owe other countries more money than any other country owes other countries money. So we've gone from being a creditor to being a debtor because of our trade deficits. Okay? Now, here's a beautiful picture over time, the last, since the 70s, of the ratio of the yuan renminbi to the dollar. So if we look back to 1985, there's about 2 yuan. $1 buys 2 yuan. We get to 1995, it's about 9.5. So we went from $1 buys 2 to $1 buys 9.5. But then looky what happens. There's a lot of flat lines in this, and then there's really up lines, and there's flat lines, and this is not the way a market makes things work, right? Look at 1995 to 2005. The price is just the same for 10 years. Well, that doesn't happen except that the government's controlling the value of the currency. Okay? So it's clear from these pictures. China says they don't, but it's clear from these pictures that they do control the value of their currency, that it's fixed or at least managed. And you can look at the last few years since 2010. There's one decline during the Bush administration, and then it kind of bounces around a little during the Obama administration. That's because we're yelling at them. We start yelling at them, saying, hey, you guys are fixing your currency. You can't do that. It's not allowed. You have to open up your currency. And so they let it go up and down a little bit now. It's managed. They let it go up and down a little bit so they can claim, hey, our currency is finding its natural equilibrium, when everybody knows that it's not. So here's the euro and the dollar. This is way more like what a market thing looks like. It's got peaks and valleys and ups and downs, and it's twice as high at some points as at other points, and this is the euro versus the dollar, a lot more bouncing around. Not to say that the European Central Bank doesn't play with the euro sometimes, but way more markety. Now here's Japan, and what you notice from 1970 down to the mid-90s is that the dollar's depreciating. The dollar starts out at 360 yen to the dollar in 1970, and by 1995 it's 80 yen to the dollar. So it lost 75% of its value. The dollar lost 75% of its value from 1970 to 1995 in those 25 years. You have trade deficits. What's supposed to happen? The value of your currency will fall because you're importing more than you're exporting, and imports make the value of your currency go down. So that's market. But then starting about 1995, what you notice is it fluctuates around between 80 and 120. It never really stays above 120 for long, and it never goes below 80 for. And that's a sign that it's managed. Now you're saying, okay, we yell at China for managing their currency, but we don't yell at Japan, and that's very true. So Japan's our friend. We not only let them manage their currency, we sometimes help them manage the yen. China, not our friend. We're mad at them for manipulating the yuan. So there's, not that there's ever any hypocrisy in government, but there might be a little hypocrisy in government. Here's the peso, the Mexican peso. You notice in 1994 there's 2.5 pesos to the dollar, and now there's about 20 pesos to the dollar. So the dollar has appreciated. The dollar's worth a whole lot more against the peso than it used to be. Despite the fact we have all these trade deficits with Mexico, the dollar has actually increased in value against the peso, and that's because of the government situation in Mexico, right? That people in Mexico don't trust their own money. They trust our money more than they trust their money. It's the whole faith thing. And so the peso doesn't do that well. These things are complex. You say, well, this is what should happen, but it doesn't always work that way because there's more factors than just imports and exports that affect exchange rates. So again, some why do we care things. We've talked before about the fact that prices are affected. So exports are a function of demand, imports are a function of supply, if you're into that supply and demand thing. Remember that a scarce currency is a valuable currency. If you want the dollar to be valuable in the international market, you need to make sure that it's scarce. Exports are going to raise the value of your currency, and imports are going to lower the value of your currency. Prices are affected by this. Remember that prices are affected by this. Prices, what we pay for things, is affected by the exchange rate. So in our system of floating exchange rates, we still should have a trade balance. The trade balance should still happen automatically. When we have a trade deficit, which means our imports exceed our exports, that should cause the dollar to fall in value. Dollar falls in value. As the dollar falls in value, the price of foreign goods goes up, the price of domestic goods goes down. We're going to buy more domestic goods, fewer imported goods, and achieve a trade balance. So you would expect in a country like China, where there's this big trade deficit, the dollar should be falling. And yet it kind of stays the same, which means that we're not manipulating it, so China must be manipulating it to keep it from falling. If the value of the yuan would rise and the value of the dollar would fall like it's supposed to, then we buy less from China because everything from China is becoming more expensive. China buys more from us because it's cheap. I can always tell what the exchange rate is between the dollar and the yen by going to Honolulu International Airport. When I go to Hawaii on vacation, sometimes there aren't many airplanes there from Japan. Hawaii is basically the same distance from Japan as it is from Las Vegas. It's right in the middle. So it's a Japanese folks, just as much as American folks, love to go to Hawaii and get married or have their honeymoon. Sometimes there aren't very many planes there. And I know that means that the dollar's strong and the yen is weak. When the dollar's falling against the yen and the dollar's weak, that means the yen is strong, and there'll be 6, 8, 10 planes there from Japan because all of these people can now get a cheap vacation in the U.S. So again, prices. So why do we make Nissans and Mercedes and Toyotas and Hondas and Hyundais and BMW and all this stuff in the United States? Well, one reason is the political reason. If you're Toyota, you can remind Congress that you employ more people in the United States than General Motors. If you're the senator from Arkansas, the biggest employer in your state is Hyundai. If you're the senator from South Carolina, the biggest employer in your state is BMW. All of a sudden, politicians favor foreign companies because those foreign companies are big employers in their states. But the other reason you do it is to prevent exchange rates from having an effect. If you're building Hondas in the U.S. and the exchange rate goes up and down, who cares? You're building a car in the U.S., not affected by exchange rates. So you can shield yourself from exchange rates to some extent by building in the U.S.